The fading afternoon light found Dwayne Johnson riding his motorcycle along a winding, secluded country road. The hush of the countryside, with its whispering leaves and chirping birds, offered a rare break from the demands of his high-profile life. In these solitary rides, he could forget for a moment the constant cameras and the roaring crowds that usually accompanied his every move. The rhythmic hum of his engine seemed to resonate with the gentle breeze, lulling him into a state of calm. He had been riding for hours, losing himself in the open highway in the vast skies. Unlike the packed arenas and busy cities he was used to, these fields and gently rolling hills gave him a sense of sweet anonymity. The sun cast gold-streaked rays across fields that stretched outward like a patchwork quilt. At intervals, old barns stood in quiet dignity, reminders of a simpler era. Sparse traffic signs and the occasional passing car were his only acknowledgments that civilization still existed. This was exactly what Dwayne had hoped for, a slice of solitude where he could clear his head. He downshifted, listening to the engine purr as he guided his motorcycle around a wide bend. He breathed in the crisp air, tinted with the smell of cut grass and distant wildflowers. But just as he considered pulling off to check a local map pinned on his phone, the sound of multiple roaring engines exploded into the tranquility. It was a dissonant note in an otherwise peaceful backdrop. Alarmed, he slowed his bike to a near crawl. Through a canopy of oak trees, he saw trails of dust rising. Shouts and raucous laughter reached his ears, carried by the wind. An icy thread of caution began winding through his veins. He'd traveled enough roads, encountered enough unsavory characters to recognize trouble when it reared its head. Rounding the bend, he discovered the source of the commotion, a battered school bus, parked in the middle of the narrow road, blocked by a semicircle of motorcycles. Immediately, Dwayne's attention sharpened. The bus, with Midvale Elementary barely visible in chip paint, looked out of place. Towering motorcycles gleamed with polished chrome, each emblazoned with menacing decals. Around them, 7 or 8 bikers lounged with an air of ownership, as if daring the world to challenge their domain. It was a scene that radiated hostility. From his vantage point, Dwayne could see inside the bus through its cracked windows, children of various ages huddled in their seats, their eyes wide and faces pale. Near the front sat a man with dark skin and graying hair, probably in his late 50s. We'll call him Walter Carter. Walter's grip on the steering wheel was white-knuckled, his gaze flicking nervously between the menacing figures outside and the terrified kids behind him. One could sense Walter's resolve to protect them, balanced by the raw fear that the bikers might do something worse. Over the rumble of the motorcycles, Dwayne heard a scrawny, tattooed biker pounding on the driver's side door with a crowbar. The shriek of metal against glass was loud enough to set Dwayne's teeth on edge. An older biker with a wolf tattoo on his neck, let's call him Ripper, leaned in, snarling words Dwayne couldn't make out. The children's faces pressed against the windows, eyes brimming with shock. Everything about this tableau screamed that something bad was about to happen. Dwayne brought his own bike to a halt at a safe distance, turning off the ignition. Stealthily, he observed. The tension was palpable. A group of men, all clad in black leather vests, had effectively cornered this bus in the middle of nowhere. The bus, a bright relic of childhood, was now at their mercy. Dwayne clenched his jaw. He knew bullies when he saw them, and these men carried themselves with the swagger of those who believed the law couldn't or wouldn't touch them. As Dwayne dismounted and carefully stood his bike on its kickstand, he could hear bits of the bikers' taunts. They mocked Walter Carter for being in the wrong place, suggesting he was lost. Their sneers and hateful jibes cut the still air. One short, bearded biker, let's refer to him as Gizmo, bent down to the bus's front tire. With a sharp flick of his wrist, he drove a knife into the rubber. The hiss of escaping air was unmistakable, and the bus tilted slightly forward. The children inside whimpered. "You hear that?" Gizmo said, tapping the bus's metal frame with a mocking grin. "You won't be driving anywhere, old man. Maybe next time you'll remember where you do and don't belong." Another biker with a shaved head, call him Ash, pounded a chain against his palm, metal links rattling with each thump. The jarring sound rang out like a twisted promise. "Damn right," he said. "You shouldn't have driven down this road. Too many kids to protect. Not enough you to go around. Walter looked petrified. From Dwayne's vantage, he saw the man's chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. The kids, some as young as 6 or 7, leaned on each other in quiet terror, one small boy clinging to his older sister. A teenage girl with braids had her eyes squeezed shut, as if wishing it all away. They were powerless, stuck in a predicament none of them should have ever faced. Observing all this, Dwayne felt the old spark of anger lighting in his gut. He recalled a time in his own youth when bullies had cornered him, believing his quiet demeanor made him an easy target. He'd learned since then that standing up to bullies, though risky, was the only way to put them in their place. Now, seeing these bikers torment a bus full of children, he decided he couldn't remain a bystander. This was far beyond a petty threat. It was cruelty aimed at innocence. He kicked the gravel lightly, planning his approach. Charging in blind might escalate matters, especially with so many kids in harm's way. But letting these men continue was not an option. He started his engine, letting its roar cut through the bikers' laughter. Immediately, heads turned. Several men scowled at the intrusion, their posture shifting. Ripper, the leader with the wolf tattoo, locked eyes on Dwayne, an annoyed snarl tugging at his lips. Dwayne rode forward slowly, stopping just short of the semicircle of bikes. The tension ratcheted up a notch, as if an invisible electric current surged between them. He cut the engine and swung his leg over, standing tall, arms at his sides. "Afternoon," he said in a low, calm tone that nevertheless carried an unmistakable warning. The bikers fanned out slightly, forming a loose ring around him. Ripper spat on the ground. "Who the hell are you?" He tapped the crowbar against his palm, trying to appear intimidating. Dwayne met his gaze, eyes unwavering. "Just a traveler passing through. Saw you cornering that bus. Figured I'd check if there was a problem." Gizmo snorted, eyeing Dwayne's muscular form. "It's none of your business, friend. Move along." The sarcasm in his voice belied the threat in his posture. Walter leaned out from the bus driver's window, looking desperate. "They've slashed the tire," he called out, voice trembling. "They're scaring the kids. Please, just let us." A wiry biker named Trent snarled, "Shut up," slamming a fist against the window. One child let out a frightened yelp. Dwayne's jaw tightened. He took a step forward, his boots crunching on loose stones. "That's enough. There are kids on that bus." He paused, his stare sweeping the group. "You want to mess with someone? Fine. But leave the children out of it." Ripper's lips curled into a sneer. "You don't get it, do you? This is our road. He," pointing at the terrified Walter, "and those brats have no business here. Neither do you." The silence that followed was as thick as the midday heat. Dwayne could practically taste the aggression in the air. He recognized that fear was a currency to these men, something they used to keep people in line. But he refused to be intimidated. Instead, he reached back into the part of himself that had faced bullies before and won. "You've got two choices," he said steadily. "Walk away now, or I make you." For a second, the bikers just gaped, as though they couldn't believe this single individual would dare oppose them. But then, as if on cue, half of them burst into mocking laughter. Ripper stepped closer, crowbar raised, menacing in every line of his posture. "You must have a death wish." A grin that was anything but friendly tugged at his lips. "Guess we'll teach you a lesson about how we do things around here." The confrontation escalated in the span of heartbeats. The first biker to lunge was a hulking figure with tattoos snaking up both arms, brandishing a chain that glinted under the midday sun. He swung it in a wide arc, aiming for Dwayne's head. But Dwayne ducked, fluidly stepping inside the man's guard. In a motion so swift it left onlookers gasping, he grabbed the chain, yanked it free, and delivered a solid elbow to the biker's sternum. Air exploded from the man's lungs as he staggered backward. That opening strike was all the others needed to jump in. Gizmo and Trent advanced from opposite sides, Trent holding a length of metal pipe, Gizmo flipping a small but wicked-looking knife in his hand. They moved with the confidence of men who had done this before. Tiana, a teenage girl in the bus, shrank back from the window, covering a small child's eyes. Walter Carter let out a low moan of despair. Dwayne, however, displayed a composure that came from rigorous training and hard-won experience. He sidestepped Trent's pipe, feeling the rush of air as it whooshed by. Pivoting, he deflected a slash from Gizmo's knife with the chain he'd seized, then sprang forward with a powerful kick. The impact sent Gizmo skidding across the gravel, the knife flying from his grasp. Trent tried to recover, swinging the pipe again, but Dwayne caught it with both hands, using raw strength to wrench it away. One quick downward strike from the pipe slammed Trent to the ground, leaving him clutching his shoulder in pain. Ripper, the wolf-tattooed leader, observed the chaos with narrowed eyes. He barked at the others to circle around, and two more bikers, call them Wade and Brick, charged in unison. Wade came from the left, brandishing a crowbar, while Brick aimed a punch at Dwayne's ribs from the right. It was a coordinated assault, likely practiced in numerous bar brawls. But Dwayne's reflexes were sharp. He twisted away from the crowbar's path, hooking Wade's arm and pulling him off balance. In the same breath, he blocked Brick's punch with his forearm and drove an uppercut into the man's midsection. The dusty road kicked up pebbles under the scuffling boots. Engine fumes and adrenaline filled the air. In the bus, children peeked through the cracked windows, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and astonished relief that a grown-up was fighting back on their behalf. One little boy whispered, "Who is he?" as if Dwayne was some comic book hero leaping off the pages to rescue them. Blood trickled from a cut on Dwayne's forearm, but he paid it no mind. He'd endured worse injuries. All that mattered now was stopping these bullies from terrorizing helpless kids. He raised his voice, hoping to break their morale. "You're done," he called, sending a pointed glare at Ripper. "Back off, or you'll regret it." Ripper snorted, still clutching the crowbar with white-knuckled intensity, as if one final push would tip the scales. But his men had begun to doubt. Wade rolled on the ground, coughing. Gizmo clutched his side, face contorted in pain. Trent was half kneeling, cradling his shoulder. The pipe forgotten on the road. The remainder hung back, uncertain. Ripper spat on the ground. "We're not finished," he hissed. Yet the command in his voice faltered. Dwayne stared him down, shoulders squared, chest rising and falling with each breath. "I'm giving you one last chance." It hung in the air like a thundercloud about to burst. The children in the bus seemed to collectively hold their breath. Walter was half out of his seat, torn between caution and a desperate desire to see the bikers gone. Ripper's gaze darted around, measuring the battered state of his men. Pride and anger warred on his face. Finally, with a grunt of disgust, he raised a hand to signal retreat. "This isn't over," he snarled. "You'll pay for this." With that, the bikers began to retrieve their scattered bikes, some limping, others cursing under their breath. Engines sputtered back to life, and in a flurry of gravel, they roared off down the road, leaving behind swirling dust and the tang of burnt rubber. Dwayne exhaled slowly, letting the tension drain from his muscles. He took a half step back and glanced at the bus. The kids were no longer cowering in their seats. Some pressed their faces to the glass in wide-eyed wonder. A little girl with pigtails mustered a shaky smile. Walter Carter finally found the nerve to open the bus door. He stepped out, shoulders trembling. It was evident he was a man who had rarely faced direct violence, and he looked equal parts grateful and dazed. "Thank you," he managed, voice thick with relief. I don't know what they wanted, but they threatened to slash another tire if I didn't turn around." Dwayne gave a curt nod, scanning the road for any sign the bikers might double back. "They're not worth worrying about anymore," he reassured, though a small part of him remained cautious. "They might try something else later, so you should get moving. Take those kids somewhere safe." Walter nodded, rubbing a trembling hand across his damp forehead. "Tires blown," he said, voice subdued. "I can't drive them anywhere on a flat." Realizing the predicament, Dwayne walked to the front of the bus, kneeling to inspect the ruined tire. A sharp slash from Gizmo's knife had torn a gaping wound in the rubber, rendering it hopeless. With a frustrated sigh, Walter explained how they'd been on a field trip when a detour led them onto this remote road, only to be ambushed by that biker gang. They singled me out, he admitted in a low tone, saying folks like me shouldn't be driving around here, especially with a bus full of kids. Dwayne's eyes flickered with anger at the cruelty. Folks like you, or folks who just look different from them, he said quietly, the injustice fueling his resolve. Racial undertones were all too apparent, and it made the situation sting deeper. The children on the bus were from diverse backgrounds, undoubtedly a fact not lost on the hateful bikers. Tapping his phone, Dwayne checked for a signal. I'll call for help, he offered. We'll get a tow or a replacement tire out here. Meanwhile, the cops might want to know about these guys. Walter gave a feeble smile. Bless you, man. I was sure we were done for. Some of the kids remained near the windows, while others ventured forward, peeking from the open bus door. A boy wearing glasses murmured to his friend, "He's like a superhero," prompting a hushed giggle. Dwayne overheard and felt a twinge of warmth beneath the tension. He'd never sought the label of hero, but the raw appreciation in the children's eyes told him everything he needed to know. While Dwayne waited for his call to connect, he scanned the horizon again. The sun was inching lower, painting the clouds in hues of orange and pink. No sign of the bikers returning, yet. The local sheriff's office eventually picked up, and Dwayne succinctly explained the situation. A bus stranded on Hillcrest Road due to vandalism by a group of bikers. They threatened the driver and the children, Dwayne added, tone grave. The dispatcher's voice sharpened with concern. We'll send a unit, they assured, and a tow truck if we can contact one. Hillcrest can be tricky, but we'll do our best. Hanging up, Dwayne relayed the news to Walter, who nodded gratefully. The driver wiped his brow with a handkerchief, then stepped back onto the bus to reassure the children that help was on the way. The kids responded with subdued cheers, relief tempered by lingering fear. Dwayne took the opportunity to glance around for anything useful. A battered toolkit sat near the front of the bus. He rummaged through it but found only a small wrench, some rusty pliers, and a half-used roll of duct tape. That wouldn't fix the slashed tire. Just as he was closing the kit, a faint rumble at the edge of hearing made his stomach knot. Could the bikers have circled back so soon? He held his breath, focusing. It could be the rescue. Yet something told him it wasn't that simple. The hairs on the back of his neck prickled, recalling Ripper's ominous parting words. This isn't over. Dwayne stowed the toolkit away and headed outside, scanning the road for dust plumes or glints of metal. The only movement was a hawk gliding overhead, silent on the warm breeze. The children, once again, pressed curious eyes to the windows, uncertain whether the immediate danger had truly passed. For a moment, all was quiet. The bus engine, idle, clicked and hissed from the heat. The smell of rubber still lingered from the slashed tire. Dwayne adjusted his stance, forcibly relaxing his muscles. He told himself the worst might be behind them, but a voice in the back of his head insisted he remain on guard. He thought of the old ring adage, never drop your hands until the bell truly rings. Right now, no bell had rung. Minutes dragged on. One of the older kids, maybe a seventh grader, stepped off the bus, presumably craving fresh air. Walter let the boy stand near Dwayne, though he hovered anxiously behind. The boy, tall for his age, breathed in and said, "Thanks for scaring those bikers away, sir." Dwayne nodded, eyes scanning the horizon. "I just did what anyone should do," he replied quietly, though they both knew not everyone would have taken that risk. A few more minutes passed, and no immediate threat materialized. The sky grew richer in color, shifting from coral pink to deeper lavender. The beauty of nature's twilight show stood in stark contrast to the violence that had nearly played out there an hour before. Dwayne could almost feel the tension bleeding away from the children, who dared to hope the danger was gone. Walter took out a small radio from the bus, trying to see if he could reach the school or any other local channel, but got only static. Then, just as the atmosphere began to settle, the low grumble of engines assaulted the silence again. This time, it was more than a faint rumor. It was a growing roar, unmistakably a cluster of motorcycles. Dwayne muttered a curse under his breath. He told the older boy to get back on the bus, quickly. The boy sprinted up the stairs, shouting warnings to his classmates. Walter, hearing the approach, leaned out to meet Dwayne's gaze. their eyes locked in shared apprehension. A line of bikes emerged from the bend, dust kicking up around them. At the forefront was Ripper, the wolf-tattooed leader, a grim smile plastered across his face. This time he had more backup. At least 10 men, maybe more, fanning out behind him. A lean figure wearing a bandana, call him Sawyer, held a length of chain in his right hand, letting the end scrape the asphalt. Another, broad-shouldered with a jagged scar across his left temple, brandished a small sledgehammer. The message was clear. The earlier retreat had been a tactical withdrawal, and now they were back with numbers in their favor. Ripper brought his bike to a stop not far from Dwayne, who stood his ground in front of the bus. Engines snarled, leaving an undercurrent of tension that simmered just below the surface. "You must think you're tough," Ripper growled, voice barely audible above the collective idle of motors. "But you made fools of us in front of that bus driver and those kids." He spat, the glob landing near Dwayne's boots. "We can't let that slide." Dwayne kept his tone level, although adrenaline coursed through him. "Those kids did nothing to you. Neither did the driver. You've got a problem with me, fine, but leave them out of it." His eyes never left Ripper's. The rest of the bikers shifted like a pack of wolves, waiting for their alpha to give the command. Behind him, Dwayne heard Walter urging the children to stay down, keep quiet. Some smaller kids whimpered as the new wave of bikers roared in, but the older ones tried to reassure them with hushed voices. Dwayne was fully aware that if things turned violent, any misstep could endanger those kids. Yet turning away was not an option. Ripper revved his engine once, then killed it. "You humiliated us," he said, glancing at the men who'd been part of the initial group. Gizmo was among them, sporting a bruise on his jaw. Ash rubbed a bandaged forearm. They glared daggers at Dwayne. "Says a lot about you," Dwayne remarked dryly. "You can't handle losing a fight, so you roll in with more bodies. That's real brave." The quiet jab landed like a bullet, stirring the biker's anger. One, a short man wearing heavy rings, hissed, "He's got a big mouth." Ripper's grin turned feral. "We'll see how big his mouth is after we break him. You hearing me, hero? This ends tonight, one way or another." Dwayne swallowed a flicker of apprehension, but refused to show it. Instead, he drew a breath. "I'm right here." He could practically feel the fear radiating from the bus behind him. Though he wanted to keep the bikers' attention on himself, he also prayed the authorities would arrive soon. The local sheriff's office had said they'd send a unit, but in rural areas, backup could be slow. "Just let them go," he said calmly, nodding at the bus. "Your quarrel's with me." Ripper exchanged a look with a tall, sinewy biker named Cliff, who brandished a steel rod. Cliff shrugged, an unspoken conversation passing between them. Then Ripper nodded. "You want the bus to go? Then you fight me, one-on-one," he proposed. "You beat me, the bus leaves. If I beat you—" He let the words hang ominously, his meaning clear. The children's safety might rely on the outcome of a savage duel. Dwayne weighed the proposition. He disliked the idea of giving Ripper that platform, but the alternative, risking a mass brawl around the bus, was even worse. He spared a glance toward the silhouettes in the bus windows. The kids were peeking from behind seats and curtains, trembling with hope or terror. Walter Carter's face was pressed to the driver's side window, silently pleading for some peaceful resolution. So Dwayne inhaled and gave a curt nod. "One-on-one, you keep your men back and let the bus go afterward." Ripper smirked, dismounting his bike with theatrical showmanship. The pack parted to create a makeshift ring on the open road. Dwayne stepped into it, rolling his shoulders as he mentally prepared. He had no illusions that Ripper would fight fairly. The leader removed his jacket, revealing more tattoos that snaked across his biceps, a testament to a life of violence. Someone in the back tossed Ripper a baseball bat. Dwayne scowled but said nothing. If Ripper intended to use a weapon, he was prepared to adapt. "See that you keep your word," Dwayne murmured, eyes locked on Ripper. The response was a sneer. "Don't worry, I'll keep it, assuming you last that long." The hush from the onlooking bikers was tangible, like the hush before a storm. Engines still rumbled here and there, but mostly they stood idle, their riders eager to witness the confrontation. Dwayne distantly noted that some of the younger bikers looked uneasy, as if not all of them were on board with harming kids. However, the older ones, like Gizmo, Ash, and Cliff, exuded eager malice. Ripper circled Dwayne with slow steps, bat tapping the pavement. Dwayne rotated to match his movement, balancing on the balls of his feet. He braced for Ripper's first move. It came swiftly. A vicious overhead swing aimed at Dwayne's shoulder. Dwayne sidestepped, swinging his forearm up to deflect, though the bat's force jarred him. The blow would have shattered bone if it connected fully. Ripper followed with a diagonal strike at Dwayne's ribs. This time, Dwayne twisted, letting the bat swish by harmlessly, then slammed an elbow at Ripper's side. The leader grunted but kept his footing, a snarl twisting his lips. Around them, the circle of bikers hooted and jeered. "Take him down, boss," one yelled. Another spat, "Show him who rules these roads." The bus kids watched in wide-eyed silence, tears brimming for some, while older ones clenched their fists in helpless frustration. Walter looked on with parted lips, whispering a prayer under his breath. The tension was excruciating. Ripper advanced again, feinting a blow to Dwayne's legs before snapping the bat upward. Dwayne barely blocked with a forearm, wincing at the impact. Quick as a snake, Ripper tried to follow with a punch from his free hand, but Dwayne ducked. He responded with a knee to Ripper's gut, forcing a choked gasp from the man. In that moment, the bat wavered, and Dwayne saw his chance. He seized Ripper's wrist, twisting it so that the bat clattered onto the pavement. The onlookers gasped. No weapon now. Ripper hammered a fist at Dwayne's temple. The blow landed, making Dwayne stagger, stars exploding in his vision. That momentary advantage let Ripper tackle him around the waist. They hit the ground in a tangle of limbs, gravel biting into Dwayne's back. Ripper pinned him, throwing wild punches, each fueled by rage. Dwayne grunted, arms raised to absorb most of the hits, though a few glancing shots stung. Blood trickled from a cut near his eyebrow. With a surge of adrenaline, Dwayne managed to wedge a knee between them. He heaved Ripper off, rolling to stand. The crowd roared in disbelief. Ripper spat out a string of curses, likewise scrambling upright, chest heaving. Wiping sweat from his brow, Dwayne glared. "That all you got?" he taunted, voice tight but defiant. Ripper's eyes flickered with raw hatred. "I'm just getting started." His approach now more cautious, Ripper feigned a jab, then pivoted. Dwayne realized too late that he was grabbing for the fallen bat. In a flash, Ripper spun, swinging it horizontally. Dwayne raised an arm but not in time to block fully. The bat clipped his shoulder, pain jolting through him. He hissed but forced himself to remain steady, refusing to yield. A hush of horror rippled from the bus as the kids saw Dwayne reel. Summoning his will, Dwayne lunged at Ripper, ignoring the throbbing in his arm. He grabbed the bat mid-swing, stabilizing it, their arms locked in a brutal contest of strength. For a moment, they were nose to nose, each straining to wrest control of the weapon. Ripper's breath stank of old cigarettes and hostility. With a guttural growl, Dwayne slammed a forearm into Ripper's chest, finally dislodging him. The bat fell from their mutual grip, spinning away into the dust. Seizing the opportunity, Dwayne delivered a punishing uppercut that rocked Ripper's jaw. The wolf-tattooed leader's eyes glazed, and he staggered, feet scrabbling for purchase. In the hush that followed, it seemed even the other bikers paused to see if their alpha would drop. Tension hung like a coiled spring. Ripper stumbled, but remained upright, face twisted in stubborn defiance. "I've had enough of you," he snarled, spitting blood onto the ground. From behind the ring of bikers, a voice hollered, "Boss, you good?" Another man, itching to intervene, raised a chain, but Ripper shot him a lethal glare, forbidding any interference. Pride or mania drove him forward. He launched a last, desperate assault. Haymaker punches, knee strikes, a frantic attempt to overwhelm Dwayne through sheer ferocity. Dwayne absorbed or deflected blow after blow, arms stinging, torso bruised, but he refused to retreat. He'd fought bigger foes in the past, faced real intimidation from men who believed they couldn't be beaten. In every fiber of his being, he felt the compulsion to not just defend himself, but to ensure those kids would remain unscathed. The final pivot came when Ripper wound up for a massive punch, telegraphing it enough for Dwayne to duck. Dwayne pivoted behind him, locking an arm around Ripper's neck in a chokehold. The leader flailed, but Dwayne's grip was iron. With a swift motion, Dwayne swept Ripper's legs, sending him to the ground. Dust billowed, and the crowd of bikers recoiled as Ripper lay pinned, gasping. A hush fell, broken only by Ripper's choked sputters. Sweat dripped from Dwayne's temples, mingling with the blood trailing from his cut brow. He held the choke, not enough to strangle, but to prove control. "Enough," he barked, voice edged with finality. "You lost. Let the bus go." Ripper's eyes bulged, rage and panic flaring, but eventually he thumped a hand against Dwayne's forearm in an unmistakable sign of submission. Dwayne released him, stepping back, chest heaving. The gang stood in stunned silence. Some looked outraged, others unnerved. Gizmo and Ash hovered in limbo, uncertain whether to rush in or accept their leader's defeat. Ripper, on hands and knees, spat curses into the gravel, then slowly got to his feet. His breath came in ragged bursts and a film of blood coated his lips. Struggling to muster a shred of dignity, he glared at Dwayne. "You pay for this," he sputtered, voice thick with humiliation. Dwayne locked eyes with him. "The bus goes now," he repeated, pointing toward the battered vehicle. Walter, from the driver's seat, saw the gesture and gripped the ignition. The kids, wide-eyed, realized that the confrontation might be over. The sheriff's response still hadn't arrived, but if the bikers actually let the bus pass, maybe they could escape further harm. Tiana, the teenage girl with braids, quickly told the younger kids to stay down and buckle up. Ripper wiped his mouth, casting a glance at his men. He let out a bitter laugh. "Fine," he ground out. "Get out of here, old man. But you," he turned to Dwayne, "this ain't done. You hear me? We'll find you." The vow hung like a toxic cloud. Dwayne simply stared him down, unblinking. "I'll be ready." Reluctantly, the bikers parted enough for the bus to maneuver around them. Walter tried to drive forward, but the bus still had a slashed tire. It lurched, protesting. A hush of horror settled over the road. They might be allowed to leave, but with a crippled tire, would they even manage? Dwayne stood at the side, meeting Walter's despairing gaze. "Just go slow," he advised. "You can drive it enough to get out of here. Another mile or so, you'll hit a gas station or main route. The cops can find you easier." Walter nodded, white-faced, and coaxed the bus forward. The metal rims screeched against the asphalt. Children cowered at each jolt, but they advanced. Ripper and his men made no move to physically stop them, likely not wishing to provoke another round after their leader's humiliating defeat. As the bus crawled past, some bikers hurled insults. Others just stared, stony-faced. Dwayne watched from the side, fists still clenched. Once the bus was beyond the semicircle, Walter nodded a silent thanks through the open window and steered down the road. The bus receded, a bright patch of yellow against the evening gloom, accompanied by the soft scraping of its injured tire. Dwayne exhaled, shoulders dropping an inch. At least the kids were moving away from immediate danger. But the scenario was far from over. Ripper remained, flanked by a half-dozen sullen men, each armed and seething. The collective hum of tension weighed heavily in the evening air. A hush fell, broken only by the distant cry of a bird and the low murmur of engines. Dwayne took stock of his injuries. His shoulder ached from one of the bat strikes, and his left forearm bore a shallow cut. Adrenaline still coursed through him, masking deeper bruises. He didn't regret a single blow. In his mind, this was the only way to keep those children safe. Ripper, face twisted with malice, gestured for his men to close in. Dwayne tensed. Were they truly so petty as to ignore their leader's loss and attempt a group assault now? Ash, the man with a shaved head, whispered something to Gizmo. Gizmo nodded, stepping forward as though to say something, but Ripper raised a hand to silence them. "No, let me handle this." The leader's breath still came in labored gasps, but the venom in his gaze hadn't lessened. "You might have me beaten in a fair fight," he said, voice dripping with scorn. "But who said we fight fair?" It was a naked admission that made Dwayne's gut clench. He knew men like Ripper thrived on intimidation. The only reason they'd agreed to a one-on-one was the promise of humiliating him. Now that he'd won, they were ready to revert to pack tactics. Any illusions of honor had evaporated. Dwayne's eyes swept around, counting. He was outnumbered at least 7-1, with each biker packing a chain, bat, or blade. The bruised, battered members who had lost earlier lurked at the outskirts, presumably still capable of some fight if needed. Despite the stacked odds, Dwayne set his stance. He had no illusions about how tough this fight might be, yet a flicker of optimism remained. Maybe the cops would roll up soon. The promise he'd made to Walter about them receiving help lingered. "So that's it?" he asked, voice low. "You'd break your word about letting the bus go safely?" Ripper snorted. "I let it go, didn't I? But you didn't say anything about yourself, tough guy." Gizmo chimed in. "Should have left when you had the chance." The setting sun cast long shadows across the deserted country road. The hush of farmland stretched beyond them. Under any other circumstances, it would have been a serene evening. Now it was an arena of potential violence. Dwayne took a step, bringing him to the center of the ring they'd formed. "If you want another beating," he said, "go ahead and try." Ripper bared his teeth in a grin that looked more like a snarl. "We're not the ones who'll be beaten," he spat. "Get him!" At that barked order, the men lunged. Dwayne pivoted to meet the first attacker, a lanky man brandishing a lead pipe. He knocked the pipe aside with a forearm block, then hammered a punch into the biker's gut. Lanky crumpled to his knees, winded, but from behind, Ash swung a chain that whistled through the air. Dwayne sidestepped, letting it crack the ground instead of his skull. Any semblance of an orderly fight dissolved into chaos. Dust swirled, kicked up by boots and scuffling feet. The clang of metal on metal and the thud of fists on flesh reverberated. One biker feinted a punch while another tried to sweep Dwayne's legs from behind. Dwayne managed to avoid both, driving an elbow into the second man's ribs. But a third caught him with a glancing blow across the shoulders with a bat. Pain flared. He staggered but stayed upright. The circle of men wove in and out, each seizing an opening to strike. In the midst of it, Ripper hung back, arms folded, a contemptuous grin on his face. He watched like a ringmaster relishing the show. Dwayne recognized the tactic. Let the underlings wear him down, then move in for a final blow. A sledgehammer nearly took Dwayne's head off, but he ducked. He retaliated with a savage uppercut that floored the man who wielded it. Another grabbed him from behind, trying to lock his arms. With a roar, Dwayne twisted, ignoring the protest of sore muscles, flipping the attacker over his shoulder. The man hit the pavement with a dull crack and didn't rise. A moment's respite let Dwayne gulp air, chest heaving. Ash swung the chain again, catching him across the thigh. Dwayne hissed, spinning to smash Ash's nose with a quick jab. Blood spattered, and the chain fell from limp fingers. Ripper cursed, rummaging on the ground for something. He found a discarded piece of pipe from a battered fence. Advancing, he signaled two others to flank Dwayne. The fight was relentlessly punishing. As soon as Dwayne battered one foe down, another leapt in. Dwayne's stamina flagged, but he pressed on, fueled by the knowledge that if he fell, no one would stop these men from seeking retribution or hurting innocents. The sun, now dipping below the horizon, threw the road into an eerie half-light. Shadows lengthened ominously, and each scuffle sounded louder in the swelling dusk. He sidestepped a blow from Ripper's pipe, only to be caught in the side by a smaller attacker's punch. Gasping at the flare of pain, he swung an elbow that connected with the man's jaw, dropping him. Desperate to end this, he mustered the dregs of his strength. He feigned a stumble, luring Ripper into a frontal strike. Ripper took the bait, lunging forward with the pipe at head level. Dwayne pivoted sideways, seized Ripper's wrist, and drove a knee into his midsection. The air whooshed out of Ripper's lungs. Seizing that moment, Dwayne yanked the pipe free and rammed the butt end into Ripper's chest, knocking him backward. Another biker, Cliff, the tall, sinewy one, charged with a chain. Dwayne whipped around, swinging the pipe in a broad arc. The chain was deflected, and Cliff reeled from the blow that caught his shoulder. The ring of bikers had thinned. Many lay sprawled or moaning. Two or three continued circling warily, eyes flicking to each other, as if measuring whether they could overcome Dwayne's battered but still formidable defense. Gasping for breath, Dwayne spat blood from a split lip. Enough, he said, though weariness weighed in every syllable. He'd lost track of how many times he'd thrown or blocked or punched, but the battered men around him were testament to his resolve. Ripper, fighting off a cough from the earlier knee blow, forced himself upright. He eyed the battered remnants of his crew, anger overshadowed by an uneasy awareness. For all their numbers, Dwayne had not fallen. Pride warred with self-preservation in Ripper's gaze. "You damn fool," he spat, swaying on his feet. "Nobody humiliates me like this." Yet he also held up a hand to restrain the remaining men, as if conceding that continuing might yield even graver consequences. They faced off in the dying light, the hush broken only by the groans of the downed bikers. Suddenly, the wail of sirens sounded in the distance. Dwayne's chest loosened with relief. Ripper's face twisted into a grimace, realizing the police were finally arriving. He turned to the scattered men who could still walk. "Let's go," he growled, a final savage glare cutting toward Dwayne. "We'll see you again. Count on it." In a cacophony of sputtering engines, the bikers rallied their wounded, hoisting them onto bikes or letting them cling to the back. The entire group sped off, weaving unsteadily. Dust and exhaust filled the air. A few coughed curses, but none lingered. For a moment, Dwayne wanted to pursue them, but his throbbing body and the knowledge that help was close stayed his hand. He sank to one knee, bracing with a hand on the pavement. Moments later, two police cruisers materialized, lights strobing red and blue across the dim road. Doors popped open. Officers armed with flashlights rushed forward, confusion painting their faces as they surveyed the battered ground in the equally battered Dwayne. One woman, her badge reading Officer Reed, approached with caution. "Sir, are you? Who was? What happened?" Dwayne forced himself to stand, leaning on the pipe for support. The flurry of violence had stolen much of his energy, and now that the immediate threat was gone, exhaustion threatened to buckle his knees. "Biker gang," he rasped, voice hoarse. "They had a bus full of kids pinned. They left just now, that way." He pointed into the twilight. Another officer, stocky and middle-aged, frowned. "We got a call about men threatening a school bus. Are the children safe?" Dwayne nodded. "Bus driver got them out. They're heading toward main roads with a slashed tire, but hopefully they'll meet you or another unit." Officer Reed radioed dispatch to confirm. As the chatter filled the air, Dwayne let the pipe clatter to the ground, wiping sweat from his face. The policeman who'd spoken first took in the multiple fallen weapons, the scuff marks, the broken fence fragments. "Looks like quite a brawl," he observed, eyes flicking over Dwayne's bruises. "You alone here?" Dwayne nodded again, too tired for a lengthy explanation. "They threatened the kids. I couldn't let it stand." The policeman exchanged glances with Officer Reed, both looking a mixture of impressed and unsettled. "We'll need a statement," she said gently, noticing Dwayne's labored breathing. "But first, let's get you checked out. Paramedics should be on their way. Can you sit down?" He considered resisting, but realized his pride served no purpose now. He lowered himself onto a chunk of broken fence, exhaling as a swirl of pain cascaded through his battered body. The swirling lights of the cruisers illuminated the vacant road, revealing a battlefield of sorts. Scattered crowbars, bent bats, tire marks, and spatters of blood. Dwayne, gazing at the aftermath, felt a hollow sense of completion. The mission was accomplished. Children freed, bullies repelled. Yet the threat lingered in Ripper's final vow. The officer tapped his shoulder gently. "We'll figure out who they are," she assured, "and track them down." The tension in his muscles ebbed, replaced by a deep, insistent ache. He cast one last glance down the road, where the bikers had vanished and the bus had escaped. He thought of the kids, especially that little girl with pigtails who had peeked out, her eyes wide with fear. A faint, weary smile touched his lips. If he'd done even a fraction to ease her terror, it was worth every bruise and cut. The paramedics arrived not long afterward, a trio of them stepping out of a white van with red stripes. They carried a collapsible stretcher and first aid gear, hustling over to Dwayne's side. With quiet efficiency, they checked his vitals, tested his reflexes, and gently inspected the bruises forming along his arms and torso. One paramedic, a curly-haired woman named Carla, dabbed antiseptic on the cut at his brow, shaking her head at the violence that clearly took place. "You took on how many guys?" she asked, her tone a mix of awe and concern. Dwayne gave a half shrug, wincing when that pulled at a sore spot in his shoulder. "Didn't exactly count." Another paramedic, an older man with salt and pepper hair, pressed a stethoscope to Dwayne's chest. "Your heart's racing," he remarked, "but that's not surprising, given the adrenaline. Let's get you stabilized. You might need x-rays on that shoulder." Dwayne tried to push the paramedics away gently, insisting, "I'll be fine." But Carla laid a firm hand on his uninjured shoulder, her eyes kind but unyielding. "Let us do our job, big guy." Meanwhile, Officer Reed and her colleague assessed the scene, collecting abandoned weapons for evidence. She took pictures on her phone, capturing the dents in the gravel and the scattered chain. Occasionally, she glanced at Dwayne with a mixture of curiosity and respect. "I'll need your full statement," she said once Carla allowed Dwayne a bit of space. "We have multiple assault and attempted battery charges here at least. Possibly more, depending on the injuries or the threats they made." Dwayne nodded. The adrenaline was fading, leaving him feeling drained but mentally alert. He recounted the entire ordeal. How he came upon the bus, saw the bikers threatening the driver and kids, tried to defuse the situation, ended up fighting them. He left out personal details about his background or fame, focusing strictly on the facts that the police needed. Reed jotted notes, occasionally lifting her brows in surprise. "They singled out the driver for his race?" she asked, voice lowering. Dwayne nodded, recalling Gizmo's hateful remark about people like him. She grimaced. "That's extra fuel for hate crime charges. We'll see how it lines up." Her partner chimed in. "Those punks have been causing trouble in the region, but never this bold." Dwayne blew out a breath, wishing it had never escalated. "They threatened to come after me again," he said, feeling it prudent to mention. The officer paused in her writing, nodding solemnly. "We'll keep that on file. Are you local?" He shook his head. "No, just passing through." A faint grimace tugged at his features. "Guess I picked the wrong day to enjoy a scenic route." Carla approached again, handing him a gauze pad to hold against a small wound on his bicep. "Hold that for a minute," she instructed. "If you're not from around here, do you have somewhere to recuperate tonight?" Dwayne considered. He'd been planning to find a motel an hour down the road. Now, battered as he was, a hospital bed might not be the worst option. But hospitals required paperwork, waiting, and too many eyes. He opted for a compromise. "I'll see how I feel. If it gets worse, I'll check in at the local clinic." Reed exchanged a look with her partner, then handed Dwayne a card. "My number. If anything else happens, or if you see them again, call immediately. We've got squads patrolling the highways now." Dwayne accepted the card, slipping it into a pocket. "Thanks," he said simply, the magnitude of the day's events settling in. Over the next half hour, the paramedics finished cleaning his wounds, applying a bandage to the deeper cut near his eyebrow, and offering to drive him to the hospital. He politely declined. Meanwhile, Reed snapped final photos and asked a few clarifying questions. Satisfied that they had the gist of it, the officers eventually prepared to leave, promising they'd keep an eye out for the gang. The summer dusk had deepened into a canopy of stars by the time Dwayne finally revved his motorcycle's engine again. His entire body ached, but the paramedics had cleared him to ride, provided he took it easy. He considered returning to help the bus driver, but the sheriff's department had likely reached them by now, or they were safe in a more populated area. Sore as he was, Dwayne was determined to push forward to the next town, find a quiet motel, and rest. He navigated the darkened road, the bike's headlight cutting a lone beam through the rural blackness. The breeze, once comforting, now stung the open cuts on his arm. Gritting his teeth, he pressed on. Each turn of the throttle reminded him of bruises forming from that final group attack. Yet as the miles slipped by, a sense of quiet accomplishment also rose within him. He pictured the children's relieved faces, the bus driver's tearful gratitude. That alone was worth the price of pain. Eventually, the faint glow of civilization appeared ahead. Signs for gas, a diner, and lodging. The silhouette of a small town rose from the darkness. We'll call it Maple Creek. A well-worn sign at the edge of town read, "Welcome to Maple Creek, Pop, 2183." Dwayne rolled down the main street, passing closed shops and a couple of late-night bars. He spotted a neon vacancy sign at a modest motel, Shady Pines Inn, and decided that was good enough for the night. He parked near the office and dismounted with a stifled groan. Each step was a reminder of the multiple hits he'd absorbed. The front office door chimed as he entered. A middle-aged clerk in a polo shirt reading a tabloid looked up in mild surprise. "Need a room?" Dwayne nodded, fishing out a credit card. The clerk swiped it, glancing at the dried blood on Dwayne's arm. "Rough night?" Dwayne offered a half smile. "You could say that." Room key in hand, he trudged to an upstairs unit. Inside, the decor was dated. Faded wallpaper, a small television set, a lumpy bed. But it was quiet, and that was enough. Flipping on the bathroom light, he caught his reflection in the mirror. Shadows painted hollows under his eyes, bruises already purple on his shoulder and ribs. The cut above his brow, patched with a paramedic's bandage, stood out starkly. He sighed, rummaging for antiseptic wipes from his bag. Gently, he cleaned around the bandage, wincing at the sting. After a lukewarm shower, careful not to soak the bandage, he put on fresh clothes. The throbbing in his muscles escalated once the hot water's fleeting relief wore off. Bruises on his torso formed an array of dark splotches. He tested his range of motion, concluding nothing was broken. He considered calling the front desk for ice, but exhaustion overwhelmed him. Instead, he downed a glass of tap water, flicked off the overhead light, and stretched out on the bed. As he lay there, images flashed in his mind. The biker's sneers, the children's fearful eyes, and Ripper's final words, laced with malice. He knew bullies often returned to finish what they started. He also knew the sheriff's department was on alert. Maple Creek might be safe enough for one night. If Ripper had half a brain, he'd be licking his wounds, not racing into a small town where cops were alerted. Still, Dwayne didn't fully relax. He clung to consciousness for a while, half listening for the roar of approaching motorcycles. Only when fatigue overwhelmed him did he drift into a restless sleep. The morning light found Dwayne Johnson stiff and sore but alive. A dull ache radiated through every muscle as he sat up in the motel bed. Checking the time, he saw it was past 7. He forced himself upright, rummaging for a clean shirt. Despite the beating, he felt a measure of relief that the night passed without further incident. After a quick wash, he wrapped a fresh bandage around the deeper cut on his arm, then stepped outside to see if his motorcycle remained unmolested. To his relief, it was exactly where he left it, unscathed. The motel courtyard was serene, a handful of cars parked under dusty palm trees. Cicadas buzzed in the rising heat. He considered seeking out a diner for breakfast, though part of him wanted to check the local sheriff's office. He needed to confirm the bus's safe arrival. The clerk in the motel office recognized him from last night, handing him a slip of paper. "Officer Reed left you a note," the clerk said. "Said it's urgent." Frowning, Dwayne read the scrawled message. "Call me when you can, Reed." No phone number, but presumably the station would connect him. He thanked the clerk, borrowed the lobby phone, and dialed the local sheriff's line. After a brief hold, Reed's voice crackled through. "You got my message," she said, sounding mildly relieved. "We found the bus. Everyone's safe thanks to you. But we also found something else." She hesitated, evidently weighing how to phrase it. "There was a note stuck to the bus's door, basically saying your time is up, signed with a crudely drawn wolf's head. We suspect it's from that gang." Dwayne's jaw tightened. "They threatened me again in front of the bus?" Reed exhaled. "Yes, once the driver reached a school parking lot, they discovered it. We're taking it seriously, but I wanted you to be aware. These men might be more organized than we thought. They're affiliated with a larger chapter, apparently." Her tone softened. "Look, I'm not telling you what to do, but maybe stay put in town until we get a better handle on this. We'd rather not see you jumped in the middle of nowhere again." He weighed the idea. His typical reflex was to keep moving, but a flicker of caution told him it might be wise to linger near law enforcement. "Thanks for the heads up," he said. "I'll think about it." She gave him the station address. "If you want to make an official statement, or discuss safety, come on by. He hung up, mind racing. The threat was real. The gang evidently wanted payback for their humiliation, but he couldn't just hide. That wasn't in his nature. Grateful for small blessings, he started his bike, riding a short distance to a local diner called the Maple Creek Eatery. Over coffee and a modest breakfast of eggs and toast, he mulled his next move. The day's sunlight filtered through the diner's large windows, revealing a quiet street outside. A few early patrons murmured about local events, a missing dog, a church bake sale, mundane, cozy small-town problems. In stark contrast, Dwayne's personal situation was anything but cozy. He thought about the bus kids. They were safe now, hopefully returning to normalcy after a terrifying ordeal. But the wolf-tattooed Ripper's threat loomed large. Dwayne recognized a simple truth. Men like Ripper couldn't stomach losing face. They needed to reassert dominance. They might track him, or they might pick an easier target. The notion that the gang could target some random person purely to prove a point was intolerable. He quickly paid his tab, leaving a generous tip. Then, driven by both caution and moral obligation, he headed to the sheriff's office. The building was a modest brick structure near City Hall. A flag fluttered in a gentle breeze. Inside, the air-conditioned lobby smelled of old coffee. Reed emerged from behind a partition, offering a polite smile. "Glad you came," she said. "Come to my desk."